I started out writing short stories and poems, and was eventually kind of a teenage lyric surrealist poet, high school, college, and then slowly got more interested in more transparent kind of work, less dense and difficult. I got a little less insecure, you might say. I was an English major. I did English lit as an undergrad, and then did a MFA in creative writing, and slowly began to write more readable stuff, I would say. I wrote one, two, three. I finished three long novels in my sort of teens and 20s. So I was writing a lot, and that was just sort of what I did. It was my was the surfing, and it was kind of a lot of it was sort of therapeutic, heartbreaks and things driving me crazy in late adolescence. I would sort of transmute into fiction, but those novels slowly got more publishable, I would say. Doing an MFA was a good tonic for me, I'd say, because I would have these workshops where I actually had people responding to my stuff saying I don't understand it, and I was pretty arrogant, and I'd usually not my reply would be something like, "That's because you're stupid." I wasn't the most receptive writer to editing, but it all kind of got through to me over time, and I began to realize I really want to write for readers. I want to get published, not just be writing for myself and sticking it in a drawer, which is what I did for years. Partly out of fear of rejection, but also just because the writing I was intent on was really personal and dense. There's actually a little passage in this book, Barbarian Days, where my best friend and I are surfing and traveling together. We're both writers, and we decided to write an article together for Australian Surf magazine. And we have the same idea. We're going to make fun of Australian surfing for this magazine, where they all really hate Americans. So we're going to be these Americans making fun of them, and we'll make a little stir. We found it very kind of mainstream and lame, not the kind of rebel thing we'd grown up with. And we couldn't write it. We just fought and fought. Everything he wrote, I thought, was just hopelessly self-indulgent, and everything I wrote, he thought was, he'd say things like, "Are you aspiring to mediocrity? Like, why? These are cliches. This is also," and I was actually aspiring to transparency, and our literary paths were kind of diverging, which we didn't know about until this tempestuous, really kind of failed collaboration. And in the end, we did a series of pieces for this magazine. But he'd write it and I'd do a light edit and we'd both sign it, or I'd write it and he'd do a light edit and we'd both sign it. We couldn't agree on anything. We did a series from Indonesia for them. And that the novel I was working on at that time, while traveling in the Southern Hemisphere, was based on I worked for 4 years as a brakeman on the railroad in California, the Southern Pacific, and I was writing a railroad novel that was really getting kind of close to publishable. I mean, it had real characters and a plot and all that good stuff. And I was finishing that when I got a job, the last day job I had out of a lot of day jobs. On that trip I was bartending and working construction and washing dishes and doing whatever, travel writing. But the last day job I got was as a teacher in a high school outside Cape Town, and this is in 1980 in the bad old days of apartheid, and a black high school, and the students our students went out on strike for 3 months, and protesting apartheid in education ended up being started where I was outside Cape Town, but it spread nationally and turned into a big confrontation with the state. It was turned out very violent where we were. We kept going to school during those 3 months. I mean, school was in session, but not normal schooling. So it was just it got really violent. A lot of people were hurt, killed. Kids from our school and colleagues of mine were, imprisoned and disappeared, and it was so intense for me as a sort of political experience that by the time that year was over, I was finishing up that railroad novel, but I just lost interest in the kind of fiction I was writing, and really wanted to do political journalism, long form. And I'd always been reading the New Yorker. I had, journals full of notes for a letter from Queensland and a letter from Sumatra and a letter from wherever I happened to be living. I remember that year in 1980 I was teaching in Cape Town, and somehow I got a hold of the New Yorker. Didn't always, see it year to year. But it included George Tro's rather famous piece called The Context of No Context, which was about magazines, among many other things, and what their sort of implicit contracts or understandings with their readers was. And I just thought it was this brilliant piece, and it really made me more sure than ever that this is what I wanted to do, was write for this magazine. So that was some years away, but I very much had it in mind. And I think so I started doing political journalism, freelancing, eventually sold something to the New Yorker and got assignments there, and found my way in there. And I think that probably those years, 10 years or more, of writing thousands of pages of fiction, pretty literary stuff, quite ambitious, sort of smoothed out my style maybe, gave me some storytelling chops, even though I wasn't publishing. And when it came time to do nonfiction, I really had to teach myself how to do journalism, which isn't that hard. Once I started doing that, I could take what I had and whip it into a pretty long story with characters and scenes. It came sort of naturally to me. I wasn't coming out of newspapers like a lot of long-form nonfiction writers are, who have to kind of break the habit of newspaper writing. I was the opposite. I was coming at it from novel writing, and eventually felt like I was pretty naive. I had to come back to the U.S. and really sort of step up my game and respect my readers more than I ever had before, to be able to freelance for better magazines. But eventually, when I did start writing for the New Yorker, it felt like a perfect fit. I was really happy there, and I've gotten along with a series of editors, very different editors. The first editor I worked for there was William Shawn, who was replaced about a year or two after I first got an assignment from him by a guy named Bob Gottlieb, who was as different as he could be. And then there came Tina Brown, who was again as different as she could be, and then David Remnick, who's still our editor-in-chief. But in different ways, I've got along well with all of them. I was sort of in awe of Shawn, and I worked fine with Gottlieb, and I somehow got along with Tina Brown, and I really like working for Remnick, and there are very, very different characters to run that magazine, and you got to get along with the editor to work at a magazine. But I've been lucky. I think it's worked out.